Welcome back to another episode of the Startup Therapy Podcast. This is Ryan Ruchan, joined as always by Wil Schroter, my friend, the founder and CEO of startups.com. Will, sometimes startups can be a real shitstorm. When, if ever, are startups not a real shitstorm?
Man, I don't think it ever stops becoming a shitstorm. And that's the funny thing. Like for startups that are doing this for the first time, founders, they don't realize that they all think that their version is the shitstorm. It's kind of like when people are in marriages and they're like, I guess we have challenges in our marriage. No, it's just called marriage. Right.
Everybody else is doing this perfectly. It just goes so well for everybody else, just not us.
Yeah. And I think what happens is for all of us, we get into a spot where like things get pretty bad, right? Like, I mean, they're always challenging because we're always so resource constrained and we've got, time's running out, all this good stuff. But there's some times where it gets like really bad. And I think in those moments, many of which people call us, other founders call us specifically, that's how we help people and say, hey, I am in an epic shitstorm right now. How do I get out of it? What I thought we could do today is just kind of talk about all the advice that we give. When we get into these situations, we get into a lot of them. What advice do we give and what works?
Yeah, I think we can keep today's episode focused on like practical ways to keep moving forward, even when everything is falling apart, which is often all the time. 100%.
Well, I mean, it's hard though, because when things are falling apart in our minds, like we've done everything wrong and we fucked up and like, and that's it, right? A lot of what we don't realize is this is just a moment in time, which, we'll talk about. But also what we don't realize is it's not just our job to keep our own headspace going. It's our jobs to keep the whole company's headspace
Everybody's.
going. And our headspace is a reflection of that. So we have to get ourselves right in order to get the team right.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I think it's like, every day it feels like there's a new fire to put out, right? Every single day. But staying positive isn't just a luxury. Like it's a survival skill. To your point, it doesn't just impact us, right? If we have a bad day, a couple bad days, a bad week, next thing you know, that's spread to the entire organization and things can really, really get drugged down. So this is a super practical episode, super important because without this survival skill, you may not make it.
I think the first thing that founders need to consider when they run into really hard times, when stuff has really hit the wall, is you've got to regain perspective. You've got to get your perspective back because that's the first thing that's lost. You're running around and all of your anxiety is just pumping and you're making generally bad decisions. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think when stuff's going wrong, right? Which again, oftentimes it is. Our first instinct is to treat every single one of those moments like it's life or death. But man, for me, and I've done this 1,000 times, it's the recipe is the same. All right. Well, the recipe is different, but the cake I bake at the end is the same, and it's burnout. Yeah. Right. So when I forget to like zoom out and ask myself, is this going to matter tomorrow? Sometimes is this going to matter next month? Is this going to matter next year? Zooming out always gives me that clarity to stop overreacting and to start making better decisions.
And I think whenever we think about our lives in the course of a longer timeline, it gives us perspective. And depending on where we are in our lives, kind of how much maturity we have by virtue of age, not just maturity, we can start to understand this. Let me give you an example. When I was in high school, and most high schoolers, that's just specific to me, when something would go wrong, when I'd ask a girl to the dance and she wouldn't say yes, my life was over.
Life is over.
Like, that was it. There was no other moment in time. I watch it with my son who's 8. And if he doesn't get like a food that he wants for dinner, his entire life implodes. There is no moment before or after that moment.
He's constantly drinking out of the Grail, man. Every supper is the last supper, right? You gotta get what you want now. There's no tomorrow.
It's crazy. For as much as we all get it, intellectually we get it. For as much as we all get it, actually stopping, zooming out and saying this too shall pass, this is a moment in time, is really hard to do, especially when things are going epically wrong. Like I've got 6 weeks to live with my P&L.
It's so important for us to remember all the time that like every single chapter in our startup company is temporary, right? And we cannot let today's setbacks define tomorrow's success, or today's success tell us that there won't be setbacks tomorrow, right? I think that's the other thing. We can't permanentize anything, right? Nothing stays the same. And so here's one for you, Will, because I think that you and I have the luxury of being able to zoom out and look at long periods of time because we have long experience. And we've been doing this a long time. And so, you bring this up a lot. We've been through multiple recessions. We've been through multiple financial collapses. We've been through multiple up cycles, down cycles, funding bliss, funding nuclear winters. For people who are just getting started, right? A lot of our audience is really early in their startup journey. For them, when you can't zoom out and look at your own history and say, okay, I've been through this before. How do you reconcile that, right? Can you go back in time to like the first, second, third time you were running into this stuff?
Yep. That's exactly what I was thinking. I'll give you one of the first times, right? So I'm 22 years old. I've been running my company at the time for about 3 years, one of the first interactive agencies. Things were going so bad that I basically had to let everybody go and move my office, if you will, back into my apartment, which like that was kind of how it was going to end, right? Like I could not see a path back, because at which point you can't pay anybody and you don't have your office anymore, especially back then. You're kind of done. Now, I want to crystallize that moment and kind of what my thinking was at the time. What my thinking was at the time is I'm $100,000 in debt, which at the time when the prevailing wage was $5 an hour, that was like $1 billion. There's no way I was going to pay that off, right? I had no college degree. I had no work skills whatsoever. So there was no version where I was like, oh, I'll just go work for consulting and make $100,000 a year. Nothing. In fact, at the time, or prior to that, I should say, the last job that I applied for was at Best Buy to be the Bose sales representative in that department. I wanted that job so bad.
That's a dream job for you, dude. Audiophile that you are, like that's that was top of the food chain right there.
But that was my fallback, was working at Best Buy, right? Like and I didn't get the job, by the way. Which is why I ended up starting a company. Nobody would
look weird in a polo. Well, it wouldn't have worked
out. So anyway, funny side note, I never put two and two together. Best Buy would wind up becoming one of our biggest clients, and I always credit them for having paid for my house.
Yeah.
I never even made
one way or the other. You went to work for Best Buy. You got
Well, one way or another, they're going to help us out. Anyway, in that moment, in that very moment where I'm like, this is the end. It had all the pieces of the end. It's what the end looks like. You stop paying people, you move out of your office, like clients stop paying you, like it's kind of how it ends. What I wouldn't know at that time was that I had an entire career ahead of me. And good things happen over time as well. Within a year, we had merged the agency with another agency, which wound up being a great deal for everybody. And we'd won a $250 million piece of business per year in the same year.
Same year. Yeah.
Like, I could have never seen that coming. And I guess when I think about it, what I didn't have at all was the benefit of experience and perspective to be able to say, oh, wait, future has time where things can happen too. They can be bad, but they can also be good. Right. I just didn't have that.
Yeah, unfortunately, like I think we've, as young startup founders, we all take that whole live in the present, right? Live in the moment thing a little too literally. And we tend to permanentize things. It's funny. I had similar time, similar experience. It was one of those cases where we had just won our biggest client, right? And so all of a sudden we have more cash than we've ever had. I go on a hiring spree. I bring in, like not double the team, but like half again as many people to get this contract done. Halfway through the contract, they lose their biggest contract. And guess what? It's on pause indefinitely. Yep. And so I remember thinking again, like it's end of days. Like this is how it ends. It will never end. Did I have the ability at that age and that time to zoom back and go, wait a minute, 2 months ago, we didn't have this client anyways, right? We had never seen this much money before, even as much as we got with the half check just to get started. It was like more than we'd ever seen before. And it wasn't really end of days, but you just can't see it then. So I guess just as early stage startup founders, if this is your first go at this, or if you're just early in life in general, if you're just young and haven't been through this in your other career or relationships, anything else in life, just try to zoom back out and remind yourself whatever's happening today is going to be some different version of what's happening tomorrow and the day after and the day after, right? Nothing is going to just continue. A chapter, not the chapter. It's not the book for damn sure.
I think part of what concerns me, though, Ryan, is when we get to a point where we lose perspective, we make really bad decisions.
Oh, 100%.
Right? And they manifest in all kinds of different ways. First off, as managers, for many of us, we get shitty.
Yeah.
I don't have a cooler way to say that, right? Like we're angsty, we're on edge, we're getting in fights with our coworkers, maybe clients, maybe we're bursting out on social media, whatever. We're the worst version of ourselves at a time when we need to be the best version of ourselves.
Yeah.
And that is so dangerous. Now, and let me pick this up because we'll carry this thread throughout this. And then we make other people like that. When we're shitty to our coworkers, right? Especially if we're in a leadership position, they become shitty and they become shitty to people in their lives. Like it's bad.
Enthusiasm is infectious. Yeah. So is apathy. So is anxiety.
Maybe worse.
So is anger.
And I find that enthusiasm tapers off, antipathy or anger spins up. cycles
Yeah,
up,
yeah.
as we just saw
Oh,
with
yeah.
our past election in the United States, right?
Oh,
For
man.
both sides.
When I plant anxiety in my garden, it's self-propagating. It grows and grows and grows. It does a
It needs the
great
water.
job, takes over immediately.
Yeah. And so the concern I have is that when we lose that perspective and our attitude starts to manifest because we don't have the perspective
Yeah.
as the nucleus of this business, it has a geometric effect across all of our other people, which incidentally are the very people we need to figure this problem out. And so rewind back to, I'm 22 and I just had to let everybody go. I was cool about it. I mean, as cool as you could be about it, right? And it turned out I hired all those folks back like within a year,
Yeah.
and they got the highest paying jobs they'd ever had in their lives, right?
Again,
Awesome outcome. Didn't see that coming, got to be honest, right?
Weird chapter, right? But not the only chapter.
One of the things you and I talk about, and I just want to reiterate, a lot of people don't know this because it's, like I said, not in the brochure. Startups go out of business many times before they become successful, right? No one tells you that. Everyone's like, oh, I guess you just find product market fit and then you just scale the business. No, you talk to any real founder, meaning they've been in it for a while, and they'll be like,
just
been out of
had
business
somebody
so many times.
in my Getting Customers workshop on Monday who had shut the business down just pre-pandemic. They just came back, just reinvigorated things, relaunched the website, rebuilt the offer, and is now working on getting marketing back on its feet 4 and something years later. Happens. Went and took care of life for a couple of years and never lost passion for the project. Didn't want to kill the startup, but needed to go handle some things in life before the startup could become a reality again.
I've done 9 startups over 30 years. And in that time, some of them did well, but a lot of them also did not do well. And I got to tell you, like, it didn't feel good. I'm trying to give the argument for perspective. When things weren't going well, I wasn't like, I've got perspective, so it doesn't matter. It still sucks.
Oh, it does.
It still sucks. It still hurts, right? It still creates a tremendous amount of anxiety, but it's how you deal with that anxiety.
For me, it's knowing that there's possibility on the other side of pain, right? It's not that oh, I have perspective, ergo pain goes away and I can just operate happily knowing that it'll change tomorrow. No, but I can operate, right? I don't operate happily necessarily. I'm not feeling great about it, but I can get something done. I can keep moving.
When we look at our own business, Ryan, you and I were talking about this earlier this week in the business of helping startups. Right. And again, our own business at startups.com. So we're kind of looking internally as of this moment. It's a slow period for startups. I mean, it's no surprise. We are now in Q4 of 2024, and there has been a funding and by way of that startup freeze for 3 years almost. Right now, we are in the business of helping startups. So by virtue of that, our business slows down. How could it not? We start looking at other companies in our space or other organizations in our space. Techstars, right? A phenomenal organization starts pulling out of major markets like Seattle and Austin, et cetera. That sucks. I mean, they're not really a competitor of ours, but they're in our space.
They're in the space, right? It's a sign of the ecosystem. Right. And it's not a positive sign that we want to see.
So how do we deal with that? So the first thing we say is, I think, I talk about this stuff with the team, we all do openly. And it's not to say shitting on Techstars. It's a great organization, right? But we also saw Venture for America go out of business, right? An organization we love. We've hired tons of people from Venture for America, right?
That was a major feed source for us for a long time.
They're awesome. But, their whole business model was putting fresh grads into startups. Well, that works when startups are actually hiring, and startups have not been hiring for a long time. The point is, we know we're in a trough, in a valley in our business. And we have 2 different ways we can approach it. One way, we just freak out, right? And oh my God, everything's wrong. Other way, which I'm actually very proud for how we've processed this, is, hey, we're in a valley, right? And there's some period of time that we have to navigate out of this valley. We got to cut costs. We got to stay lean, all this stuff. But it's a valley, right? It's going to happen. It's happened to us before. That said, Ryan, if I had never been in this before, my perspective would be so much different. I would be, what did we do wrong? What did I do wrong? I would have looked at this whole period completely differently. I know because I was in this position and I did look at it differently. But because I've got perspective now and I can say, oh, this is a moment in time, we can navigate way differently. Right? With confidence. If that's hard for people to believe, with confidence in a trough, because we know it's a moment in time. We're looking for opportunities within that moment in time, and we'll build a better business because of it.
And it's been a wonderful comfort to be able to do that for ourselves. It's also been an amazing gift to be able to hand that to other startup companies simply by saying, similar to what you've just said, like, look, I have actually seen this before. We've been through this. This is what it looks like. Here's where it's probably going to end. Here's what we do to get through it. And they go, oh, God, there is something on the other side of this. Yeah, there likely is. It reminds me of like those moments when like my parents shared advice about parenting to me, when I'd be like, oh my God, all this stuff's happening. And then they're like, kids do that. And you go, oh, kids do that?
It's not just me.
Like that's a thing. Kids do that.
Right,
Oh,
right.
okay, cool. I can calm down now a little bit, just knowing, right? It's just that commiseration goes so far sometimes, just to know that, again, like you're not the only one going through this. You said at the beginning of the episode, which is like, my startup's a shit show. No, every startup's a shit show. That is the name of the show.
You're running on. Yeah. My kid is difficult to manage. It's called having a kid, right? Yeah. So let's talk about the number one advice we give to founders when they call us with an amazing amount of anxiety, like their heads are ready to explode.
Yep.
The first thing we tell them, you need to take that energy, that nervous, anxious energy, and convert it to action.
That's it, man.
Because I got to tell you, that nervous energy is powerful stuff if you channel it right. Or 100%. Destructive stuff if you don't.
If you don't, yeah, man. Action is the antidote to anxiety for me. And one of the other things I think is really important to note there is, like, we can talk about this more later, but like even really little steps, right? Just little actions chip away at really, really big problems. And I think it's easy to lose sight of that. But yeah, as we start to think about, because I think this is one of the challenges, right? So practical challenge, you're faced with a big problem, maybe, let's say a truly big problem, and anxiety starts to take over, right? The kind like gut wrenching, all consuming, I just want to crawl under a rock and never come back out again. I know I've shared on the podcast before, there was a period in time where I was having so much anxiety around a couple of projects that we were doing. When my phone would ring, I would immediately become tired. Right?
Yeah.
Like, wow, right? Talk about anxiety like through the roof. My phone rings and I'm like, I'm sleepy because I really don't want to have this conversation. Right?
Yeah,
like,
right.
Logical response. The way out of it was action. I'll use a more recent example. So we had, you may or may not remember this, probably been 4 or 5 years ago now, major HubSpot issues, right? We had a couple little issues, snowball out of control. Some really big stuff started to happen within our HubSpot account. And I was looking at that just going, oh my God, I was having so much anxiety, and our emails going out. Is stuff happening? Are we properly, are we handling leads? All this stuff going on. And like, there was just this mountain of anxiety because it was this mountain of work. And I finally got to the point, probably with your help, where you were just like, dude, just pick something little, just like chip away at it. And so I did, and that felt great. And then what I did was like, I just said like, look, when I look at this thing as a mountain, I'm never going to get over it. And my anxiety is going to go through the roof. So I just said like, I'm just going to take an hour a day, and that'll cap it. That way I can limit my anxiety, I can limit my pain, and we'll get through it. It took me 3 or 4 weeks, and we got through it. But it went from that point of just like pure anxiety, running around like a chicken with my head cut off, to just taking some action and turning it into a little bit of progress. Huge.
So along those lines, anxiety is energy. Anxiety is momentum, right?
It's frenetic energy in most cases.
Correct, right? But how we choose to use it, usually a huge waste of time. We usually use it by worrying, as if worrying is an action. So whenever I'm in this spot, and I get in this spot all the time, I'm just an anxious dude, and I've been running startups for 30 years. Like I don't know how else to operate, right? But when I get into the spot where my anxiety starts to really crank, my first instinct now is, where can I put this energy? Now, when I say that, the key is somewhere simple, usually a dumb task. When I was 22 and I had, crazy anxiety, we were shutting the business down. I remember it was the first time I started to have this thought process, and it was so effective. I said to myself, okay, I can spend the next 10 minutes or an hour really doing anything, right? I can spend it worrying, I can spend it, blah, 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 or I can just spend it writing code. And I was like, what if just every time I get anxious, I wrote code? Well, guess what? I wrote a boat, right? Because I had an outlet. And so now, whenever I have that anxiety, my first instinct is find somewhere to put the energy. Because lo and behold, it's that energy that gets you out of the anxious situation.
Yeah, man.
And I think within that, those small actions, they start to cure like a bigger problem. You know what I mean? Like, in part of it is not making it worse. In other words,
letting it spiral out of control, right? Gaining positive momentum instead of negative. It's to me, anxiety is always about the momentum shift, right? Clearly, at the point where I'm starting to get anxious, momentum is working against me. Something is going the wrong direction. So it's just about changing inertia, right? Getting it moving the direction that I want it to move.
Something that's really funny about everything we talk about here is that none of it is new. Everything you're dealing with right now has been done 1,000 times before you, which means the answer already exists. You may just not know it, but that's okay. That's kind of what we're here to do. We talk about this stuff on the show, but we actually solve these problems all day long at groups.startups.com. So if any of this sounds familiar, stop guessing about what to do. Let us just give you the answers to the test and be done with it. And I think like we keep thinking, here's a great example. Every startup that's ever raised money has a period where they don't think they're going to raise money. It's kind of like the nature of raising money, right? And so the anxiety is at full tilt. So their thought is, oh, well, I guess I need to work on something with this anxious energy to reach out to more investors or to update my pitch deck. And yes, that's not a bad place to put it, but I want to be clear. Part of this exercise isn't necessarily doing the thing that's going to dispel the anxiety. And the reason I say that is because sometimes there are anxious things that don't have an action that's going to get done anytime soon, right? Yep. It's like, oh, our sales are down by 30%.
Right.
Are there micro actions I can take to help that? There are, right? Obviously. Yeah. Right? There are. But I also think that there's some aspect of saying, hey, I'm just going to do our accounting, or hey, I'm just going to I'm going to work on this boring task. I'll give you an example of that. For me, I have a long list of tasks, like what I call side tasks, that I reserve specifically for when I'm feeling this way, or frankly, when I'm just like kind of in a position where I'm like, I'm creatively like shot, right?
Yeah.
And I've built this habit where when I see one of these tasks, I'm like, ooh, that'll be a good anxiety task, right? And I just kind of throw it into that bucket, right? And when I have anxiety, I go to that well and I just motor through those tasks and I feel great about it.
Feel good about it. Yeah. I think one of the challenges is that it feels like in those moments where you're really anxious and there's some big thing, let's say it's like an existential crisis for the company type thing.
Yeah, of course.
We feel like because our energy matches that problem, right? The anxious energy's there, anxiety's there, worries there, all that stuff is there, that our actions somehow have to match that. And I think that's the biggest misconception. And I think that was the biggest thing that I finally got over, was that it's actually far better to start with those tiny steps. If I don't have to save the company to fix my anxiety or to gain momentum, we can take the smallest possible steps, and that actually starts to get us moving towards where we're going.
I think within that, a big part of what we tend to focus startups on, founders specifically, when they hit these really rough patches, you say, look, first thing you do, reset all of your goals.
Yep.
Every single thing that you're working on, reset every single one of those goals. And it takes them a minute to figure out what that means. But what we're really saying is take all the big things you were trying to do and turn it into a micro goal, the smallest possible thing, which has so many benefits. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, there's it feels like such a cheat code to learn how to shrink scope, right? Stop worrying about next quarter, even next week. Like, what am I going to get done today? Right. And we talked about this on the podcast before.
Yep.
We plan in weekly sprints, right? For this reason. And a weekly sprint breaks down into what? Days break down into what? Hours break down into what? Tasks, right? Like it matters so much because it's a horizon that you can actually do something about. And I think that's a big part of where anxiety comes from, is you feel powerless. You feel like you can't get something done. And if you keep thinking that way and you keep trying to act too big, that is exactly what will happen, right? You will be right for all the wrong reasons. So when we can shrink scope and just bring things down to ultra manageable, ultra achievable, all of a sudden that momentum shift becomes really, really easy, right? Instead of trying to move the entire mountain, the shovelful, right? We all get this. We all get this metaphorically. But I think that for a lot of founders, it's really hard to actually take that action and say, well, but that doesn't feel meaningful enough. I'd rather, die on my shield, all right, than, or whatever that is, right? Like that whole thing where it's like, it needs to be big. Like if this is going to be the end of me, I want to go out doing something big, not focus on a bunch of little stuff. And look, I think we do have to be careful here too about saying like, ignore the big stuff. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying ignore the big things and just go do some little stuff and everything will take care of itself. No, I didn't say go bury your head in the sand and focus on admin tasks either.
Let's not look at it in terms of these are irrelevant tasks. Let's look at it in terms of these are critical tasks, but we're making them smaller, right? So for example, if our big issue was we're trying to raise money, right? We keep coming back to that, but we're trying to raise money. The macro task, if we want to call it that, is raise our bridge round, raise our next round, whatever we're trying to do. The micro task is find one more investor to reach out to.
Yeah.
Right. And so part of what gets us so paralyzed is that we take the macro task as being the work, and it's never the work. It is typically the culmination of all those micro events, right? It's kind of like when you look at your room and it's dirty or messy, right? And my kids are like this, right? The room will be messy.
You give me anxiety just thinking about a messy room now. Well, thanks a lot.
Yeah, right. Well, so first thing I always say is, here's what I want you to do. I want you to pick up that football. That's it.
Yeah.
Put it away.
Yep.
That
Yep.
seems super easy. And I'm like, okay, now go pick up that. Right. And like once they understand it in the case of achievable micro tasks, all of a sudden you can get stuff done. You and I were talking about this. You came and visit me to work on my house, right? Build this new house. I remember telling you, I was like, this whole house and this entire process is all done by like one dude.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. Like, not literally one person, but kind of, sort of.
Yep.
Every single part of the project, from the excavation to the foundation build to the framing, is just a couple of people, right? In some cases, literally one person. Like one person with an excavator did all of my excavation, right? So like it seemed like this Herculean task, but one person just chipped away at it. Yep. I personally built every cabinet, every vanity, every closet, every single part of my house by myself in my free time, which I don't have a ton of. But what I did was, instead of looking at it and saying, oh my God, I have to build all this stuff, I said, no, all I have to do today is spend 1 hour this morning sanding this one thing. That's it. Yep. That is my only task. Nothing else matters. Yep. And lo and behold, now I have an entire house worth of stuff.
You got a house worth of stuff. Yep. Yeah. It's the HubSpot example that I gave earlier, right? It was like fix HubSpot became the outcome I was trying to chase. And it's like, there were so many little things going wrong when I broke it down to send tomorrow's newsletter, make sure that everybody that should get it gets it, make sure that the open rates are good, right? Just fix that one thing, get there. That is a piece of fix HubSpot, right? And so you just tackle these little, and again, they're not unimportant, right? Every single one of those things is important, right? Every cabinet in your house is important. Every newsletter that goes out from startups.com is important. And so it's not like, oh, well, yeah, the newsletter. Well, but what about HubSpot? Well, this is part of how we get there.
Well, okay, so this lesson actually was taught to me, and I've told you the story once before, was taught to me by a British SAS officer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right. So of all things, I'm at a Forbes summit. This is, oh my God, it's like so long. It's like 15,
can I just say, I'm really glad that neither of us can illustrate anything quite like this. like I'm glad that I don't have a personal anecdote that hits quite like this one.
Yeah. So story goes, I'm on this summit with a whole bunch of other speakers, and they're all founders, and we're talking about something. And we're kind of in the green room, so to speak, like ready to go on stage. And I'm talking to this guy who's a founder, and what he's developed was a practice munition, a bullet essentially, for soldiers to learn how to get shot and keep on going, right? Which is maybe the most badass thing a founder has ever told me, right? Yep. And so I asked him, I was like, well, how'd you get into this? I love backstories. And he said, he's like, well, I'm actually a former SAS officer, and I've been shot 6 times. I'm like, wait, what? Like, you got shot 6 times and you still live? He's like, no. I've been shot on 6 separate occasions.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait, what?
What?
I'm like, okay, first off, maybe you're the most unlucky man of all time.
Right, yeah.
It reminds me of that first stormtrooper that always
your job at the shooting
gets
range,
like blasted immediately. Anyway, so I'm talking to him about it, and I said, like, how do you deal with this? He's like, actually, part of what we do, the munition is a bit of a red herring. The issue isn't that you've been shot, because most wounds actually aren't fatal at all. Yeah. He said that most soldiers die because they bleed out, because they get into shock. What we really teach people, the munition, again, is just a way to like get hit with the force of a bullet,
right?
Without actually penetrating you. He said the training is what to do the second that happens. Yeah. Now, I kind of can't think of a higher anxiety moment than I've just been shot, and I'll probably get shot again, right? So here's what he said, and this is what stuck with me, and this is what I always think about, like in my toughest moments. He said, when that happens, the first thing we train the soldier to do is to focus on nothing but getting to cover. Nothing else matters in the world. Not whether your heart's beating, not whether who's around you. It's getting to cover so you can protect yourself and stop the wound, etc. And he said, so what we do is we teach focus in our most anxiety-ridden moment, how to be the most focused. And he's like, you know what? And that's why I'm still alive. Because when that would happen to me, I'd get shot. And my first reaction, the first time it happened, a little bit different. My first reaction wouldn't be, oh my God, I'm going to die. It's, I need to get to cover. And nothing else matters until I do that. Whenever I think about being in a high anxiety situation, I look for what is my cover? What is the next place I need to go?
Yep.
Total blinders on, Ryan, right? Total blinders to anything else. And it is so effective.
How do we achieve safety in this moment?
There's a couple of things here. One is making the goal small, but it's also focus, right? We talked about turning anxiety into action, but part of this too, again, it's not just us. We got to look at our team and say, If we're stressed, they're stressed. So how do we take their work and make it smaller? How do we take their work and give them the opportunity for those tiny wins? Because what we're also talking about here isn't just making the work more achievable, which is important. It's also creating a different momentum. How the momentum starts to build more milestones. It's hard to build momentum when you're missing all of your milestones. But now all of a sudden, when you get all your milestones, you just achieved 28 things today, you feel like a champion, even if they're small.
Absolutely. And man, like momentum is so important here, and breaking those things down is so important. I think I've shared this anecdote in the past too, but in my one foray off into the corporate world where I realized how well things don't work, I was tasked with handling things for 14 different country market level operations. And politically, the request was that we make progress, even if small, on all of them at the same time, right? I couldn't prioritize one over the other. We needed to show each and every one of the markets that we cared about what was going on.
Sure.
And we're trying to show progress. And my God, when you're trying to make progress on 14 things at once, there is no momentum. You couldn't see it. You couldn't feel it. 2 years later, there was marginal progress on anything. And like people were kind of happy that they'd gotten some attention, but nothing had actually changed. And so we were able to shift that. At my like insistence kind of at that point, it was like, look, I just need to spend the next 2 months doing nothing but this project for this country market. And all of a sudden, by breaking that down and making that smaller, we started to pick up momentum, right? Lots of little wins do build big momentum, which allows you to take on bigger and bigger stuff too. So I think it's important too. This doesn't always mean like, oh, you can only ever have small tasks. No, there can be big projects, big things get done. Of course, we can argue you always break those down anyways. Right. But like when you do start to pick up that momentum, all of a sudden it changes what you can get done. And again, not just for you, but across the team, right? So when everybody's just had a little win, now we got some steam, right? We can actually move forward. We can do something else. We can move on, do bigger things, which feels great. To tie this back to kind of like the shit show that are startups, it's like I think we have to remember that when chaos hits, that aiming for greatness is not the idea. It's aiming for progress
and survival.
Small,
in some cases,
small little wins build big momentum, right? When you get shot, you're not thinking, how do I win the battle? You're thinking, how do I get behind that log so I can avoid getting shot again? So I can put on a bandage, staunch the bleeding, then maybe we'll return fire. It's about like, again, it's about right sizing what you're trying to do for the thing that's going to, if you optimize for momentum instead of optimizing for the size of outcome, you're going to be far better off.
I think one of the things that's been a great hack for me, and I always talk to other founders about this, when they're in super high stress situations, when the anxiety is just boiling over, focus on something else. Now, I know that sounds batty. Wait, what do you mean focus on something else? Like, how could I'm about to lose my house. How could I possibly focus on anything else? Okay. Here's what's interesting about that. We all need something that is as far from our work as possible that we can obsess over. I don't just mean like, oh, go play some video games or something. I mean something you can obsess over. That's not work. Now, at different points in my life, I've had like that different hobby or something that I could obsess over. For a long time, it was video game, right? Like I have more hours in the Civilization franchise than I think the people who made it.
I think you've outstripped their development team at this point.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, right? And if anybody is a fan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But through all of my years, in 30 years, I've played almost like every one of the franchise. I've got ungodly amounts of hours into it. Why? Because I needed it. I needed something to channel my anxiety into that was an obsession, something that I could get so gripped by that it would pull me away from that other thing. And over the years, it's changed. What is it for you, Ryan?
Oh, man. For me, at this point, it's a couple different things. I mean, I tend to do kind of like you do, where I'll go kind of project to project. For a while, it was ponds, which I really mean it was learning all about bacterial digestion and like all of these other crazy things. It kind of depends too. I think there are times where I have more physical energy due to anxiety. Sometimes I have more mental energy due to anxiety. One of the best for me, soccer's always been there, right? Soccer's always there. And one of the things I love about it, it has a start, it has a middle, it has a finish. There's a process and a progress to it. And I can obsess about my performance, and I can obsess about the team's performance. I can do all kinds of stuff to just really, really get my mind off things. The other one was jujitsu. And the beauty of jujitsu is that it forces you to obsess and stay in that moment. When someone has their arm around your neck and they're trying to deny blood and oxygen to your brain, you don't think about much else
Yeah.
until you stop
Yeah, you're
thinking altogether.
what's
And
my
then you wake
PPC
up and you
budget?
go, I'll think differently about that next time. I think this is such a great tip, man, about getting obsessive about something else. And here's the great news for founders, like probably everybody, but specifically founders, our brains are wired to obsess.
I know, right?
Makes us want to build things in the first place because we can't just look at it and go, oh, that doesn't work like it should, or that could be better. Oh, well, we've never said that. We're like, that could be better. I'll make it better. I'll fix that. I'll go work on that. So we're already wired for this. So when startup stress starts to take over, that obsession turns into an endless loop of what if, how do I fix this? That's that moment where I know I'm like, I need a healthy outlet, something where I can redirect that energy. And again, like for me, it's soccer. For you, right now it's woodworking and home building. And I don't really think that it matters a ton what it is, as long as, like you said, it allows for obsession, right? It has to be something that's deep enough and nuanced enough that it actually allows you to dig in and obsess, right? It can't be like some people are like, well, I go for a walk. I don't know what happens on your walks, Will.
Yeah.
Walks are never quite enough for me, right? Like maybe you're like, I go walk. What do? I walk across the one during rush hour traffic. Oh, okay, shit. Yeah, maybe that would do it. But it has to have that, like, erase everything else, force you to put the blinders on and become truly engrossed in it. For me, that's where the therapeutic nature kicks in, right? It basically has to block everything else out for a period of time. It doesn't have to be something fancy, man, right? Like,
agreed.
Some people clean their houses. Some people garden. If that's what it is, and that can get you to that place, if that gets you to that all-consuming, fully physically absorbed, fully mentally absorbed, fully emotionally absorbed, awesome. It's all it needs to do.
Agreed. And I also think that something that, like you mentioned, cleaning, something that doesn't have consequence is equally important, because
or has a positive consequence.
Of course, right? If we obsess about something that actually creates more anxiety, like that's problematic,
oh my God.
Right?
I had a friend who his diversion from startup companies was day trading.
Oh yeah, there it is. That's exactly.
Do you want to know how old he was when he had his first heart attack?
40.
Not even kidding. 44, right?
Yeah,
like it's like wrong secondary obsession. Cannot do
right.
That.
In gambling's another one. It's kind of the same thing. But like the keys to this, though, I think the first key to being able to embrace this is allowing yourself to embrace it. Is allowing yourself to say, to be a better founder, I need to go obsess for this thing. I need to use this as my mental, emotional punching bag to get stuff out of my system. Now, a lot of times we'll look at it and we'll say, well, I can't be, doing woodworking now or doing gardening right now. I have to go build a startup. No, you actually kind of do need to do it. That's kind of the point, right? You need to get into that so you can get this stuff out of your system. If you're like, oh, well, I shouldn't be cleaning my apartment right now, I should be working on my startup. Yeah, at some point that's absolutely true. But that therapeutic nature of obsessing about cleaning isn't incidental, right? When people go to clean for therapy, it's because mentally they're trying to put things back. They're trying to restore order. They're trying to get to a completion point. For me with woodworking, it was more about being able to say, I'm done. See, and when we build startups, one of the things we often can't say is that we're ever done.
We're done.
Nothing's ever done. In fact, it's always horribly incomplete. We never have enough people that we've hired. We've never had enough revenue. We've never had enough funding. It's always not enough. The level of completion is rare. And what I always say, when we are complete with something, it's often amorphous. We just launched the website. You want to have a more boring completion? Launch a website. I've done a million of them. Never once was it exciting for more than 5 seconds.
There it is. Yeah, like there's a release and relief, but it's not really excitement. I mean, it's excitement about now it's done, but like now a whole bunch of new work begins called marketing and bug fixing and everything.
Yeah, it doesn't have the same thing, even though it's important, right?
Yeah. And that's, again, like to your point, that one has a consequence, right? So that isn't that, I mean, like, and I know you weren't talking about building a website as right, but, to tie that back together, it can't be a distraction, right? And it can't have a negative consequence. It has to be a bit of a reset. And so I want your feedback on this one, because I've realized that a lot of the things that I've done have had a fairly finite start and stop. But the one that you named, like civilization, like you can kind of endlessly play that. So how do you balance that? How do you keep it from becoming escapism when there isn't a consumption limit to your secondary obsession?
In that case, it didn't matter that there wasn't an end. It had milestones of progression. Right. I beat this nation, or I launched this technology, right? Like it had a very definitive stop and start, even if it reset to another one. The problem, like I said, in our business and what we do as startups is there often isn't a very clear goal.
Yeah.
When I was a
kid, there's no feeling of momentum or progress.
Right.
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 Are we getting anywhere? I don't know.
When I was a kid, I would go out on the job site with my dad, and I was a carpenter, and we'd build stuff, right? When we were done with it, I'd be like, Dad, this is amazing. Like how great is this that like we were able to build this thing? Yeah. Now, my dad did not give a shit, right? He's like, son, I'm 40 years old. My back is shot. My knees are shot. Do anything but this, right? Which is ironic because it's literally the first thing I did. But my point is, I loved the fact that there was something visible. A few months back, when you and I were in my workshop and we were building drawers of all things, right? Drawers for a cabinet. We sat there and we marveled at how well they came out. Right. Yeah. Like we were excited about the slot that we put in it. We were excited about how tight the seams got.
Obsessing over those little details, man.
But it was awesome because at the end of the day, we got to see something in a very short period of time, literally at the end of the day, we got to see something that was the outcome of our work.
Yeah.
And we were reminded therapeutically that our work has value, that our work has outcome, that our work has a milestone and there's a pride to it. Much of what we do in startups actually doesn't have that. And it is wildly frustrating. It adds up.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think that's a great point. I think that's one of those places where you can lean back and say, like, how do I redesign it so that it does? Right? How can I redesign this process? And this is one of the reasons when I'm talking to people who want to go build a product, and let's just say they haven't worked in that industry before, they haven't built a product like that before. This is going to be something very new for them. Very frequently, I'm pushing them to do something in a service or consulting basis that's related to that, partially for that exact reason, because we actually do get to an outcome much sooner. Something that we can actually say like, oh, I talked to this person, I solved their problem, they're off and running, I feel good, right? That type of momentum is so important. But to put a bow on the secondary obsession segment here, like I think it is really, really important that every startup founder and even people within the organization, like if you're the founder, you should be pushing people in your organization to also have this outlet. Startup stress, any kind of stress needs an outlet, but startup stress in particular, because of the fact, like you said, there isn't always this defined end to where this goes, meaning we don't know when the stress is going to end. And the reality is it doesn't really end. It changes, right? It just changes clothes, it changes shape, changes form, where there's going to be more stress. So it needs that outlet. And to make sure that to the extent that you can, you're obsessing over something restorative, something that fills you back up, not something destructive that also just wears you out, but in a different way.
So I actually don't think that any of this has to do with specifically times are bad and we're acting like this. I think everything we just talked about is how you manage startups, is how you
startup
manage
I've ever
the
lived
process.
through.
Yes, right. And so when we're talking about having perspective, it's not just useful for when times are going bad. It's just as useful for when times are good, right? Yeah. When we're talking about converting our anxiety into action, when will there ever not be anxiety, right? Always be anxiety. So that skill, not just for us, but for our team is incredibly important. When we're talking about taking big goals and turning them into small goals, right? That is valuable to every aspect of everything that we build. One of the oldest adages in software development is you can tell the success of a project or the probability of success by the length of the timeline. The longer the timeline, lower the probability, right? That's the nature of small goals. And when we're talking about getting obsessive about something, about finding some place where we can unload all of this anxiety on a regular basis in ideally a healthy way, all of the things we just talked about need to become fundamentally how we're built as founders, right? And how we build our startups around this for all the people that are part of this. If we can't figure out how to channel and manage our anxiety in a productive way, our chances for building a big startup or being around and healthy long enough to do it are pretty much zero.
Overthinking your startup because you're going it alone? You don't have to, and honestly, you shouldn't, because instead, you can learn directly from peers who've been in your shoes. Connect with bootstrapped founders and the advisors helping them win in the Startups.com community. Check out the Startups.com community at www.startups.com to see if it's for you. Could be just the thing you need. I hope to see you inside.